The morning I discovered what my parents had done, I honestly thought I was losing my mind. I woke up feeling unusually groggy. My head felt strange, but I couldn't immediately figure out why. Then I reached up to move my hair away from my face. My hand stopped. Something wasn't right. I jumped out of bed and hurried to the mirror, and the second I saw my reflection, my stomach dropped. My hair was gone. Not completely, but enough to make me look ridiculous. Long sections had been chopped off unevenly, leaving behind a mess that looked like someone had cut it in the dark. Hair covered my pillow, my blanket, and even part of the floor. For a few seconds, I just stood there staring, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I noticed a pair of scissors sitting on top of my dresser. I recognized them immediately. They belonged to my mother. Beside them was a small note. I picked it up and read it. "Don't worry, you'll still look presentable. Just focus on your speech for Aria's wedding." I read those words again, waiting for some kind of explanation. But there was nothing. No apology. No explanation. Just a casual message, as if ruining someone's appearance while they slept was completely normal. Just a casual message, as if ruining someone's appearance while they slept was completely normal. That wedding was only 2 days away. I had spent months preparing for it, not because I wanted attention, but because it was one of the few family events where I thought I could finally show up feeling confident. I had bought a dress with money I earned myself, I had practiced my speech several times, and for once, I wasn't showing up as the forgotten daughter standing quietly in the background. Apparently, that was a problem. When I walked into the kitchen, my parents acted like nothing unusual had happened. My father was reading the newspaper, my mother was drinking coffee, and neither of them looked surprised to see me. "Morning," my father said. I stared at him. "What happened to my hair?" He shrugged. "Honestly, it looks better shorter." My mother didn't even bother looking guilty. "It's Aria's wedding," she said calmly, "the focus should stay on the bride." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They weren't denying it. They weren't ashamed of it. They genuinely thought they had done the right thing. To understand why, you need to know how things worked in my family. My sister Aria was always the center of attention. If she wanted something, my parents found a way to get it. If I wanted something, I usually got a lecture about responsibility. Aria got music lessons, expensive clothes, and family celebrations. I got reminders about budgeting and sacrifice. When she finished university, my parents paid for a luxury vacation. When I finished, they told me it was time to start supporting myself. So I did. I worked hard. I moved out. I built my own life without depending on them. But no matter how much distance I created, somehow I always got pulled back into the same family dynamic. That's why what happened next hurt so much. I had actually believed this wedding might be different. For once, I thought everyone would be focused on celebrating instead of comparing sisters. Instead, I woke up with half my hair missing. A few hours later, I called my roommate, Nova. The moment she saw me, her eyes widened. "What happened?" When I explained everything, she looked even more shocked. "Wait," she said. "Your parents actually did this?" I nodded. For a while, neither of us spoke. I wasn't thinking about revenge. Honestly, I just wanted to skip the wedding and disappear for a few days. But then Nova reminded me about something I had completely forgotten. Several weeks earlier, my therapist had suggested that I record difficult conversations with my family. Not secretly. Just voice notes afterward so I could remember exactly what had been said. Over time, I ended up saving dozens of them. That afternoon, Nova and I started listening. One recording after another. My mother complaining that I attracted too much attention in family photos. My father making comments about how certain women always tried to make events about themselves. At the time, I ignored those remarks because I was used to hearing them. But listening back now, they sounded different. It wasn't concern. It wasn't advice. It was resentment. And once I noticed the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. Nova looked at me and said quietly, "You know they're never going to admit what they did." I knew she was right. Then she asked a question that stayed with me all night. "So what are you going to do about it?" That evening, I made a decision. I would still attend the wedding. But I wasn't going to play the role my family had written for me. I wasn't going to stand there smiling and pretending everything was fine. And before the weekend ended, a lot of people were going to learn the truth about what really happened inside our family. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my reflection in the mirror. I kept thinking about the wedding, my parents, and everything that had happened over the years. Around midnight, Nova grabbed a chair and sat me down in front of the bathroom mirror. "If you're going," she said, "you need a haircut that looks intentional." For the next hour, she worked on fixing the damage. When she finally stepped back, the uneven mess was gone. My hair was much shorter than before, but at least it looked presentable. I looked at myself carefully. It wasn't the hairstyle I wanted. But it wasn't the hairstyle my parents wanted either. Nova smiled. "There. Now you look like someone who knows a secret." I laughed for the first time all day. The next morning, I put on a simple dress and headed to the wedding venue. It was a beautiful place. A large estate surrounded by vineyards and gardens. Exactly the kind of place my sister had always dreamed about. As guests arrived, everyone seemed excited. My parents were greeting relatives. Arya was posing for photos. Everything looked perfect. At least on the surface. I spotted several family members I hadn't seen in years. A few of them looked surprised by my hair, but nobody said anything. I knew they were wondering what had happened. I also knew they were about to find out. The wedding schedule included a brunch before the ceremony. That was when family members were expected to give speeches and share stories. Originally, I was supposed to stand up and talk about my wonderful relationship with my sister. My mother had even helped write parts of the speech. The version she wanted me to read was full of compliments and sentimental stories. I had practiced it several times. But that speech was sitting in my purse untouched. As people finished eating, someone handed me the microphone. My mother smiled from across the room. My father nodded approvingly. They thought everything was under control. I took a deep breath. Then I walked to the front of the room. "Hi everyone," I began. The conversation stopped. Dozens of faces turned toward me. I know most of you are expecting a wedding speech. A few people smiled. I was supposed to talk about family, support, and how special today is. My mother kept smiling, but something about her expression changed. Maybe she sensed where this was going. I continued. "But before I do that, I want to share something that happened a few days ago." The room grew quieter, and I could feel people paying closer attention. 2 nights ago, I went to sleep in my apartment with waist-length hair. Several people looked confused. When I woke up, most of it had been cut off. Now the room was completely silent. My father immediately stood up. "Enough," he said sharply. But I wasn't finished. "The reason I'm telling you this is because the people responsible are sitting right here." Gasps spread across the room. I heard someone whisper, "What?" My mother's face turned pale. My father took a step forward. "Sit down," he said. "No," I replied. For the first time in my life, I wasn't interested in making things easier for them. I wasn't interested in protecting their image. I looked around the room. Most of you know my parents as generous, loving people. Several relatives nodded uncertainly. What you don't see are the things that happen when nobody else is around. My father started walking toward me. I pulled out my phone. Luckily, I don't need anyone to take my word for it. His expression changed immediately, because he knew exactly what was on that phone. I pressed play. The first recording filled the room. My mother's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. She was complaining about a photograph I had posted online, talking about how I always attracted attention, and how people focused on me instead of Arya. Several guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. Then another recording played. This time, it was my father's voice. He was making jokes about women who needed reminders not to outshine brides. A few people looked shocked. Others looked embarrassed. The recordings continued, one after another. Months of comments. Months of resentment. Months of favoritism. By the time the final recording ended, nobody was eating anymore. Nobody was talking. The entire room was staring at my parents. My father finally snapped. "This is ridiculous." My mother stood up. "Turn that off." But it was too late. Everyone had already heard enough. I looked directly at them. For years, I convinced myself that I was imagining things. My voice shook slightly. "But I'm done pretending." Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended them. Even some of our relatives seemed stunned. I handed the microphone back. "I hope the rest of the wedding goes exactly how Arya wants it to." Then I stepped away. For a moment, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. People started talking all at once, questions were flying everywhere. My father was arguing with relatives. My mother was crying. Arya looked furious. Not at our parents. At me. As I headed toward the exit, I heard her voice behind me. "Do you realize what you've done?" I turned around. For a second, I thought she might finally acknowledge what had happened. Instead, she said, "You ruined today." I stared at her. Then I realized something. Even now, she wasn't upset about the haircut. She wasn't upset about the recordings. She wasn't upset about the truth. She was upset because people were talking about something other than her wedding. That told me everything I needed to know. I walked outside. A venue employee followed me and politely asked me to leave because the situation inside was getting out of control. Honestly, I didn't argue. I was already done. As I reached the parking lot, Nova called. "How did it go?" I looked back at the building. Guests were gathered in small groups. Phones were out. People were talking. The perfect image my family had spent years building was cracking right in front of everyone. And for the first time in a long time, I felt calm. "I think," I told her, "they finally listened." At the time, I thought the story was over. I had no idea that within 24 hours, what happened at that wedding would spread far beyond our family. When I got home, I thought the hardest part was over. I was wrong. That evening, Nova showed up at my apartment carrying takeout and her laptop. She dropped everything on the coffee table and looked at me. "Before you get mad," she said, "I need to tell you something." I immediately knew I wasn't going to like whatever came next. "What did you do?" She opened her laptop. I uploaded the video. I nearly choked on my drink. "You what?" "The entire speech," she replied, including the recordings. For a second, I just stared at her. Then I looked at the screen. The video had only been online for a few hours, but thousands of people had already watched it. The comments were pouring in faster than I could read them. Some people were angry. Some were shocked. Many were sharing stories about their own families. I closed the laptop. This is insane. Nova shrugged. Maybe. But people deserve to know the truth. The next morning, things got even crazier. My phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Text messages. Emails. Social media notifications. Missed calls from relatives. By lunchtime, the video had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. By the end of the day, it was everywhere. People were reposting clips. Content creators were discussing it. News websites started writing articles about it. The story had escaped our family circle. Now, complete strangers were talking about it. The strange part was that most people weren't focused on the haircut. They were focused on everything behind it. The favoritism. The emotional manipulation. The years of being treated like I mattered less than my sister. Apparently, a lot of people recognized those patterns. For the first time, I realized how many people had experienced something similar. My inbox filled with messages. Some were only a few sentences long. Others were pages long. People told me about controlling parents, golden child siblings, and family members who constantly compared their children. Many ended the same way. Thank you for speaking up. I didn't know how to respond to most of them. I had never intended to become some kind of symbol. I was just angry. I was hurt. I wanted the truth to come out. That's all. 3 days later, I received an email that completely caught me off guard. At first, I assumed it was spam. The sender worked for a well-known lifestyle magazine. I read the email 3 times before I finally believed it. They wanted to interview me. Not just interview me. They wanted to feature my story in an upcoming issue. According to the editor, readers were fascinated by what had happened. She said my story represented something much bigger than one family conflict. I wasn't sure if I agreed with that. But I agreed to meet with her. A week later, I found myself sitting in a professional photography studio. The entire situation felt surreal. Hairstylists, photographers, makeup artists. People asking for my opinion. People actually listening when I spoke. For most of my life, I had been treated like the extra character in someone else's story. Suddenly, people were interested in mine. The photo shoot lasted most of the day. When it was finished, the editor sat down beside me. She showed me a draft of the article. The headline wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about family drama. It was about finding your voice after years of being ignored. For the first time, I felt like someone actually understood the point. Meanwhile, things weren't going so well for my family. I learned that from relatives. Not because my parents called. They never did. Apparently, the wedding guests had been talking non-stop. Everyone wanted answers. Everyone wanted explanations. And my parents couldn't control the conversation anymore. The image they had spent years protecting was falling apart. One aunt told me people were avoiding them at community events. Another relative said several guests left the wedding reception early after hearing about the recordings. Even some family friends had started distancing themselves. As for Arya, she was furious. Not once did she contact me to ask how I was doing. Not once did she acknowledge what our parents had done. Instead, she posted vague messages online about betrayal and jealousy. Most people saw right through it. That only made her angrier. The strange thing was, I didn't feel victorious. Months earlier, I probably would have. But now? I mostly felt tired. I wasn't interested in winning. I wasn't interested in proving anything. I just wanted to move forward. And that's when another unexpected opportunity arrived. One afternoon, I received a call from a woman named Veronica Hale. She was the founder of a successful media and branding company. At first, I assumed she wanted an interview. Instead, she surprised me. "I've been following your story," she said. I wasn't sure how to respond. She continued. "What happened to you was awful. But what impressed me wasn't the story itself." "What was it then?" I asked. "The way you handled it." I laughed. "I don't think I've handled any of this particularly well." "You'd be surprised." Then she made an offer I never saw coming. She wanted me to join a new campaign her company was developing. The campaign focused on confidence, self-worth, and overcoming toxic family dynamics. At first, I thought she wanted me to appear in an advertisement. Then she explained the position. It wasn't a modeling job. It wasn't a publicity stunt. She wanted me involved in planning the entire project. Creative meetings. Brand development. Public speaking. Campaign strategy. The opportunity was far bigger than anything I expected. After the call ended, I sat in silence for several minutes. Everything in my life had changed because of one decision. The decision to stop staying quiet. What I didn't know was that while my future was starting to take shape, my family's situation was about to get much worse. And this time, it wouldn't have anything to do with me. The truth had already been exposed. Now the consequences were starting to arrive on their own. The next few months were some of the strangest months of my life. On one hand, my career was moving faster than I ever imagined. On the other hand, my family seemed to be falling apart. And for once, I wasn't the one trying to hold everything together. After accepting Veronica Hale's offer, I started working closely with her team. The campaign focused on confidence, self-respect, and breaking free from unhealthy relationships. A year earlier, I never would have believed I could do that kind of work. Back then, I spent most of my time trying to avoid conflict. Now, I was speaking at events and helping shape projects that reached thousands of people. The work gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. For years, I had measured my value based on how my family treated me. Now I was finally building an identity that had nothing to do with them. Meanwhile, the situation back home kept getting worse. The first sign came from one of my cousins. She called me one evening and immediately asked, "Have you heard about Arya and Damien?" Damien was my sister's husband. The same man who had stood quietly beside her throughout the wedding drama. "No," I said. "What happened?" My cousin lowered her voice. "They're having serious problems." Apparently, Damien had discovered something he wasn't supposed to find. According to several relatives, Arya had been using anonymous social media accounts for years. Not just recently. For years. She had left negative comments under my photos, mocked my accomplishments, questioned my appearance, and even spread rumors about me online. All without anyone knowing who was behind it. At first, Damien refused to believe it. Then he found proof. Screenshots. Messages. Old accounts connected to her email address. Everything. My cousin said the argument lasted for hours. The bigger issue wasn't just the comments. It was what they revealed. Damien had married someone he thought was confident and successful. Instead, he discovered someone who had spent years obsessing over her own sister. Someone who viewed every achievement as a competition. Someone who couldn't stand seeing another person receive attention. The marriage started unraveling after that. I won't pretend I enjoyed hearing it. Honestly, I felt more disappointed than satisfied. Because it confirmed something I had suspected for a long time. The problem wasn't one bad decision. The problem ran much deeper. A few weeks later, another relative called. This time, the news involved my parents. Their social circle had changed dramatically. People who once invited them to every event suddenly became distant. Friends stopped returning calls. Neighbors became polite but cold. The wedding recordings had exposed something many people had never seen before. And once people saw it, they couldn't unsee it. My parents hated that. For most of their lives, reputation had been everything. They cared deeply about how others viewed them. Now they couldn't control the narrative anymore. The truth was already out there. And no amount of explaining could erase it. What surprised me most was that they still never reached out. No apology. No accountability. Nothing. Months passed without a single meaningful conversation. At first, that bothered me. Then it didn't. The longer I stayed away, the more I realized how peaceful my life had become. I wasn't constantly defending myself. I wasn't trying to earn approval. I wasn't walking on eggshells. For the first time, I felt free. Around that same time, Veronica invited me to lunch. I assumed we were discussing another campaign. Instead, she arrived with a folder and a huge smile. "I have an idea," she said. That sentence usually made me nervous. But in this case, it changed everything. Her company was expanding. They planned to open a new creative office in several cities. One of those cities happened to be my hometown. I laughed when she told me. "Out of all the places you could choose?" She smiled. "Sometimes the best locations have the most meaning." Then she slid the folder across the table. Inside were business plans, financial projections, and leadership proposals. At the very top was my name. I looked at her. "You're serious?" "Completely." "You want me to run it?" "I do." For a moment, I couldn't speak. A few months earlier, I was sitting in my apartment, crying over what my family had done. Now, someone was offering me the opportunity to lead an entire office. The contrast felt unreal. But after thinking about it, my answer became obvious. I accepted. The following months were busy. There were meetings, interviews, planning sessions, and endless preparations. Every day felt like another step toward a future I had never imagined. And eventually, opening day arrived. The office was located right in the center of town. Modern. Bright. Professional. The exact kind of place I used to dream about working in. The launch event attracted far more people than we expected. Business owners. Community leaders. Journalists. Students. People from all over town showed up. Some were curious about the company. Others were curious about me. Either way, the building stayed full all afternoon. As I stood near the entrance greeting guests, I couldn't help noticing how different everything felt. Years ago, I walked through this town feeling invisible. Now, people were approaching me with respect. Not because of my family. Not because of my sister. Because of what I had built myself. I thought that would be the highlight of the day. I was wrong. Because just before the event ended, two familiar faces walked through the front door. My parents. I hadn't seen them in months. For a second, I almost didn't recognize them. They looked older. Tired. Uncomfortable. And judging by the way they looked around the room, they hadn't expected what they saw. The office. The crowd. The success. None of it fit the version of me they had carried around in their heads for years. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then my mother slowly walked forward. "We wanted to see you," she said. I had a feeling this conversation was going to be very interesting. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't nervous about it at all. For a few seconds, none of us said anything. My parents stood near the entrance while guests continued talking around us. It was strange seeing them there. Not because I missed them. Because for the first time in my life, they looked uncertain. My mother finally broke the silence. "We've been trying to find the right time to talk." I almost laughed. Months had passed since the wedding. Months. And suddenly, now that I was standing in a successful business surrounded by supportive people, they wanted to talk. "What do you want to discuss?" I asked. My father stepped forward. "We know things got out of hand." Things got out of hand. That was his description of drugging me, cutting my hair, humiliating me, and spending years treating me like I mattered less. I folded my arms. "That's an interesting way to describe it." He looked away. For the first time, he didn't have a response. My mother tried a different approach. "We made mistakes." I waited. She stopped there. No apology. No accountability. Just a vague statement. The same kind of statement people make when they want forgiveness without taking responsibility. I looked at both of them. "Do you know what's funny?" Neither answered. The first time my hair was cut wasn't at the wedding. Their expressions changed immediately. Because they knew exactly what I meant. When I was 12, Mom cut my hair because she said it was getting too much attention at school. My mother's face tightened. When I was 16, Dad told me not to wear a dress to a family event because I might make things difficult for Arya. Neither denied it. Because they couldn't. That wedding wasn't one bad decision, I continued. It was years of decisions. The conversation grew quiet. Even nearby guests had started pretending not to listen. My father sighed heavily. "We did what we thought was best." That sentence told me everything. Not "we're sorry." Not "we were wrong." Just another excuse. For years, they had convinced themselves that protecting one daughter justified hurting the other. And they still believed it. At that moment, I stopped waiting for an apology. I finally understood something. The apology I deserved was probably never coming. And surprisingly, that realization didn't hurt. It felt freeing. Because if they weren't willing to change, then I didn't have to keep hoping they would. My mother looked around the office. "You've done well for yourself." There was something strange in her voice. Not pride. Not exactly. More like disbelief. As if she still couldn't understand how I had succeeded without their approval. I smiled politely. "Thank you." The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. That stage had passed. Anger requires emotional investment. I simply didn't need anything from them anymore. Then my father asked the question I knew was coming. "Can we start over?" Years earlier, I would have jumped at that opportunity. I would have convinced myself that this time things would be different. This time they would change. This time we'd finally become a real family. But standing there, I saw the situation clearly. They weren't asking because they understood the damage they caused. They were asking because they had lost control of the story. They had lost the ability to define who I was. And now they wanted access to the version of me that succeeded without them. I shook my head. "I don't think so." My mother's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" I kept my voice calm. "I mean, I wish you both well." My father frowned. "But we're family." "Yes," I said. "We are." Then I paused. But being related to someone isn't the same as having a relationship with them. Neither spoke. The truth hit harder than any argument ever could. I looked around the room. My team was waiting for me near the stage. Guests were gathering for the final presentation. People who respected me. People who supported me. People who had chosen to be part of my life. And suddenly, the contrast became impossible to ignore. For years, I chased approval from people who had no intention of giving it. Meanwhile, I overlooked the people who actually cared about me. That chapter of my life was over. "I have a presentation to give," I said. My mother looked like she wanted to say something else. My father looked frustrated. But neither stopped me. As I turned away, I heard my mother quietly say my name. I stopped. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she asked, "Do you really think you'll be happier without us?" I thought about that question carefully. Then I smiled. "That's the thing." She waited. "I already am." The answer seemed to take all the energy out of him. Neither argued. Neither followed me. They simply stood there as I walked away. A few moments later, I stepped onto the stage. The room erupted into applause. Not because of my family. Not because of the wedding. Not because of the video. Because of who I had become. As I looked across the audience, I realized something important. The best part of my story wasn't exposing what my family did. It wasn't watching people take my side. And it definitely wasn't seeing their reputation fall apart. The best part was learning that my worth had never depended on their opinion. For years, I believed they controlled my confidence. My future. My identity. I was wrong. The moment I stopped asking them to see my value, I finally saw it myself. Later that evening, after the event ended and the last guests left, I stood alone in my office. The city lights reflected through the windows. Everything was quiet. My phone buzzed with messages from friends, coworkers, and people congratulating me on the launch. Not a single message came from my parents. And honestly, I preferred it that way. Some stories end with reconciliation. Mine didn't. Mine ended with something better. Peace. Because in the end, my family didn't decide who I became. My sister didn't decide it. My parents didn't decide it. And neither did the worst day of my life. I did. And for the first time ever. That was enough. That's where my story ends. If there's one thing I learned from everything that happened, it's that your worth doesn't depend on whether other people choose to see it. I'd love to know your thoughts. Would you have handled this situation differently? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories like this. Also, tell us where you're watching from. I always love reading your comments. I'll see you in the next story.